So I'm Christine Harper. I am the secretary with IOTSec. If you've not met me, I work at TSIS. Been there for 5 years. I work in PCI compliance, one of the most dreaded areas. And I joined this organization in January, and was asked to be the secretary to help promote this and get more people to join. So some of the announcements that we have is I'd like to just say thank you to the NIM. I know they're not in here, but they are a nonprofit organization. So please support them, order drinks. When they're able to do the appetizers, please order the appetizers. They were very nice to let us use this location. Also, can I have a show of hands who is new here, who has not been to an IOTSec meeting before? Awesome. Several new people. Awesome. All right, so just quick social media. We are on social media. We've got our website, columbus.iossa.org. If you've not seen it yet, please go look at it. Our calendar of events is on there. We also have Twitter and LinkedIn, so please go find our new LinkedIn page. It is on the screen as well, and for those of you that are already part of IOTSec, you will get a copy of this full sheet. All right, so I'm not going to take it for very long because we got some other folks here. So CDW has joined us as a diamond sponsor just recently. Hooray! So I would like to invite Augustus, right? Yeah. If I can get it correct, to come on up.
Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you so much, Peter. Really just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody in the room here for including us in the organization. Very excited to be a sponsor, excited to start participating as well. At its core, it seems that this organization is about a platform to exchange ideas, best practices, and skill improvement for all the information security professionals and students of Columbus. As a company that doesn't manufacture any products ourselves, we feel that's pretty well in line with our approach to security as well. Really what we attempt to do is leverage our resources across the country to offer their perspectives on different verticals, different industries, and how best to approach security and some of the challenges that each of your organizations are facing. So to quickly introduce ourselves, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, we do quite a bit of business here in the Columbus area. We're big. I'm not going to go into those numbers too much other than to say those 8,800 coworkers, half of those are technically focused, so those are delivery engineers and architects, many of which are on the security side of the house. Again, with that objective of helping guide those conversations around security best practices and ideas that fit your organizations. For those that are familiar with us, there's been something of an evolution. A lot of people are familiar with CDW as more of that product company, server storage, switch route, things of that nature. As we've evolved throughout the years, the approach has become more focused around solutions and particularly security, helping our clients navigate those topics that are maybe a little less certain and maybe a little more complex, so that we can lend some expertise where it makes sense and help them get to the solutions that are going to be best fits for their organizations and objectives. This is kind of our core approach across the environment. The assessment stage, so evaluating your environment, understanding what the needs and objectives are. The design stage is where we try and work alongside you to find a solution that might fit what you're looking to achieve, assisting you with deployment if necessary, and ultimately assisting you with the management of that solution as well. And this is really the only slide that I think is particularly relevant here, and not any of the statistics about what we've done so much or the dollars that our practice brings in, but more the people, those 250 solution architects and engineers who do focus on assisting our clients navigate the security spectrum every day. So whether that be conversations around what's going on in the market, emerging products, different developments that we're seeing, solution architecture, deployment strategies, road mapping for the future, ultimately assisting you with your objectives, not pushing any particular agenda, not being beholden to any manufacturer or point product, but really guiding our clients to those things that are going to be the best fit for them. So we're very excited to be here. Thank you for including us. Looking forward to learning about the organization, learning about your respective interests, looping our team in and helping facilitate those conversations where it makes sense. So thank you.
All right, so I'm not going to stay up here and talk any longer myself. I'm actually going to introduce MRaggo. He is with 802 Secure, CTO of 802 Secure, and has about 20 years of experience with security research. So I'm going to pass it on over. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. So thanks for having me. Again, my name is MRaggo, Chief Security Officer with 802 Secure. I live near Bryan, which is up towards the Athens area, north of Atlanta. I made the trek down today. I've known Peter for a long time. We saw each other last year at DEF CON, and he said, I need to have you come out and speak. So we finally made it happen. So thank you for having me. Today's topic will be focusing on IoT security, but the aspect of it that we'll be focusing on are really IoT risks beyond your network. And this presentation will dive into a lot of areas that pertain to that, but it's an area that NIST, Gartner, and many others are referring to as cyber physical security. Cyber being our traditional IT and information security and managing and securing the fundamental network. The physical side being the maturity of all of this stuff showing up around us. 48% of new building construction in the United States comprises some type of IoT functionality for the lighting, for the power, for the HVAC and thermostats and things like that. Physical surveillance for buildings and facilities is becoming more and more wirelessly enabled, more and more IoT enabled. So what we're going to expose in this presentation is a lot of the organic research we do around this area to help really expose some of the risks and threats that all of you, may or may not have seen before, to really give you new insights in terms of where are things going in terms of IoT and how can we prepare for this next wave of threats. Sound cool?
Yep.
All right. So next slide, please. So the area that we focus on is wireless with our product. And as you may have seen with IoT, lots and lots of IoT devices now speak more than just Wi-Fi. Many of the hubs in your own home support Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth, and all these other protocols and frequencies. We find virtually everybody that we work with is largely very much unfamiliar with these protocols or even how to secure them, or that they're even running in the environment as a whole. And so, I've used this slide for a while to really kind of, break the ice in terms of presentations I frequently do because, a lot of this stuff is going on all around us, but for the most part, people aren't aware of it. So we'll expose that in the next hour. We also author a lot of research you can download from our site. We did an infographic outlining many of the systemic risks that we see across IoT and wireless, across all of our customers. We have customers that include the casinos in Las Vegas. We're there during Black Hat and DEF CON monitoring a lot of what's going on. We have international airports that are customers and many others as well. We're also heavily involved with PCI, believe it or not, too. And so this report kind of exposes a lot of the risks we see on an ongoing basis. We'll highlight some of that too, spawning from our research. I don't usually like to talk much about myself, so instead I usually tell a funny story about my background and how I got into security. So while I was starving and trying to make it as a musician, even though we had a heavy metal band, we had videos, we were touring, I needed to make a living. And so I was working at the NASDAQ stock market at the time. And I was a Unix system administrator and an Oracle DBA. And this was like circa 1994. And around that time, I was always somebody that was always tinkering with things on the network. And I got the latest Information Week magazine. And there was this dude on the cover, like sitting on top of a Silicon Graphics computer with like long hair. And I'm like, this guy looks pretty cool. I got to read this article. And I read the article. It was about the first vulnerability scanner that had come out at the time, which was called Satan, which was an acronym for Security Assessment, something or other. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. But it was long before there were things like Nessus, Qualys, or really anything else. Again, this was 1994. Nobody even understood the concept of scanning for vulnerabilities. There were, hey, I guess we sometimes apply patches, but you're saying we actually have to scan and assess stuff, right? It was just 25, 26 years ago, it was a concept people hadn't really grasped yet. So I downloaded the tool and I decided, hey, I'm going to run it on the NASDAQ network, right? In the middle of the day while, for the trading floor. Now, NASDAQ is a virtual trading floor. It always has been before the terminology virtual had even been coined. So in the early 70s when NASDAQ was born, it had always been a virtual trading floor. It's not like the New York Stock Exchange in New York City where people are running around on the floor. The only presence for NASDAQ in New York is really just the sign, and really that's it. So they have data centers in Trumbull, Connecticut, data centers in Maryland, and I worked at the Maryland data center. So I fire up this tool and I just let it run on the network while I'm doing other stuff, right? Your stock market goes down, fails over to the other location, right? And it starts to dawn on me, did I do something? And so about a half hour later, the CISO, and they didn't call them CISOs back then, VP of Security, shows up on my desk and says, would you come with me, Mike? And then I realized I was at fault. So it was a fireable offense, right? They said anytime you pull a floor tile or do anything else in the data center during trading hours, you're fired on the spot. So I'm escorted into his office. I pretty much plan I'm going to be fired. I'm just really trying to figure out next what I'm going to tell my wife when I get home. And so he sits down and he said, well, Mike, he goes, I'm here to offer you one of two options. You either fired or promoted. And I said, promoted? And he said, yeah. He's like, the only security team we have today are people that are doing audit, paperwork, things like that. He's like, you clearly demonstrated you can take down the network. Now you'll get the badge to protect it. So what's it going to be? And I had to make a decision on the spot. So obviously I took the job and I've been in security ever since. So true story. Okay, so as we mentioned, we're going to talk about IoT security and this topic of cyber physical security. You're probably going to hear this more and more. NIST does have a standard for this. You can find it out on the NIST website. We start to think about what we've been doing over the last 30 years in terms of IT and information security. We've been kind of myopically focused on the network, and for justifiable reasons, right? For a long time, that's where our data has lived, right? Long before even we had cloud technologies where it would live elsewhere, right? But the point here being is, whether it's on the network, the cloud, or other kinds of things, right? IoT is bringing about the fact that there are now new devices and new networks in your environment, whether you realize it or not. It may stem from the fact that you're in a more modern building with building automation. And if your company owns the building, what about that HVAC that is cooling and heating that building and that facility? We have customers where we found, Wi-Fi thermostats that have been installed right after Johnson Controls or Honeywell has gone in and upgraded all the HVAC for the data center. And we found, hey, for one of our big data center customers out in the West Coast who hosts data centers for PCI and payment processing, actually had a bunch of new Wi-Fi enabled thermostats all throughout the data center. Wi-Fi, open, unconfigured. So in the middle of the night, anybody could have connected into that wireless access point built into that Wi-Fi, adjusted the temperature to 90 degrees, 100% humidity. What impact would that have on the data center or the servers? Right? Exactly. So these things are happening around us, and they may comprise lighting or power for the building. They may comprise physical security and the surveillance cameras, which are becoming more and more wirelessly enabled. This area of stuff that doesn't touch your network at all, but is in your building or surrounding environment, is what they really call physical. And so when we talk about cyber physical, that's what we're talking about. The convergence of finding a way in which to manage and secure and really perform fundamentally asset management beyond your own network. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So when we think about this at a deeper level, there's a lot of things going on. When I talk with customers a lot, they're focused. If the subject of IoT or wireless comes up, they're thinking about, hey, is there an Amazon Echo on my network? I need to find the rogue on the network. What they're not really looking at is everything else IoT going on in their environment. We're now seeing 50% of the customers we work with have a problem with employees bringing in wireless thumb drives, wireless SD cards, and wireless storage. We thought we had basically squashed this problem 10 or 12 years ago when everybody bought IronKey and thumb drives and SD cards were banned, right, and turned off as a Microsoft policy. But now people are bringing in these devices again, not knowing they have wireless built into most of them. And because they don't know it has wireless built into them, it remains unconfigured. And so they're backing up data to these wireless storage devices that are wide open. Anybody can connect to it, pull the data off of it, and it's a huge risk for a potential breach. Not only that, the majority of these devices come with a battery backup. So even after they unplug it from their laptop and they put it in their pocket and they get in the car and they go to the coffee shop, they get on Metro Transit or something else, that device is on, Wi-Fi is open, anybody can connect to it as they're walking around with it in their pocket. We talked about thermostats and then also surveillance cameras, which we're going to get into as well. Can you differentiate between the different surveillance cameras in your environment? Do you have a good inventory of what that is? Are there spy cameras in the environment for a long or short-term period? Would you even know? So these devices are becoming more and more readily available, more and more connected, and because most organizations are blind to them, a lot of these devices remain in the default configuration, which is wide open where anybody can connect to them. Next slide. So running threat research at 802, we put together this infographic to really capture a lot of the risks that we see. How many organizations today have a smart TV in the conference room? Virtually every single one of them. What's the security posture of that device that everybody connects to every single day? What's the configuration of the wireless for that connectivity? And the last person that connected it, did they realize that they either intentionally or accidentally left malware on it, waiting for the next person to connect to that smart TV? We talked about wireless thumb drives and surveillance cameras. Printers we find in every single environment, right? Most of the new printers today include a wireless functionality, but most companies are deploying them still with an Ethernet connection. So many times we find not only these wireless printers, but they're still in default mode, open or a default password anybody can connect to. Now they have the mobile app you can download and send print jobs to it, right? And so there's a lot of different risks and exposures that can occur. And we'll also talk about drone activity too. So bottom line, when you look at the impact, this goes beyond information security. I know most of us are InfoSec professionals, but it's really now impacts to the data center. There could be malware infestations and data loss, but there's also impact to operations, safety, privacy, things that we haven't always thought about from an information security perspective. What if that power or lighting system or something else to the building was actually hacked? Normally when there's a power outage, everybody goes home. Well, now the same thing can happen if this network remains unprotected because it's not really connected to your corporate network. No one's really monitoring it or knows the security posture of it. So as I mentioned, this now expands beyond IT and information security. One of the frequently asked questions I get is, well, if it doesn't touch my network, why should I care? Just consider some of the risks here that are managed by other teams. We work with casinos, international airports, hospitals, building automation, facilities, even the fraud teams, many times are different groups other than information security. Do these people know how to properly assess the equipment that they're managing and monitoring? There's so many companies out there now, cybersecurity companies, focused on critical infrastructure and power companies, right? Because every other day we're seeing a headline about somebody being, getting a malware infestation or some type of backdoor attack, right? So when thinking about this in the context of your own organization, who has visibility across all of this? And does your CIO and your CISO have, visibility into these other different departments, equipment, risks, the building, and things like that? Because what you're going to find, and this is something you're even hearing from NIST, is that there is this convergence going on. Next slide. So what we see is sort of a lack of visibility, right? These devices speak a lot of different protocols and frequencies that people just are not familiar with, and thus you don't even really know that they're there. Furthermore, when you start to think about shadow IT, now you have this issue around shadow IoT, where people are bringing in Amazon Echoes and they're bringing in wireless thumb drives and wireless storage, maybe even other IoT-enabled equipment for the kitchen area or a refrigerator at their desk. We've seen it all, right? Even when they upgraded some of the warehouses for one of our other customers, they had all these IoT-enabled garage door openers. They didn't even know that they'd never been configured. They were wide open. In the middle of the night, anybody could have come by, connected to that network, opened the garage door, and stole all kinds of equipment from the building. So just to cap this off, and then we'll start to get into more technical details, here's just a chronological list of some of the notable hacks over the years. A casino, one we don't work with, was actually hacked via their fish tank, right? It was IoT enabled. The network team had no idea it had been connected to the network. It was used as a backdoor into the network, and they stole the entire high roller database, all their information regarding, phone numbers, email addresses, including some really wealthy international people. A manufacturing plant was hacked through its thermostats. And you may also remember the Olympics was hacked multiple times via Wi-Fi. One via the smart TVs, and then the fundamental Wi-Fi network as well was jammed and offline during the initial part of the Olympics. So as I mentioned, we do a lot of organic research. And so last year I've been doing a lot of research around surveillance cameras and spy cameras. Spy cameras readily available on Amazon and other places. They come in all shapes and forms. One of the most popular ones that we find in customer environments is this wall charger, right? It looks like a total benign, cell phone charger that is plugged into the wall, and you think somebody. But hidden in that is a little spy camera. And because it always has power to it, it's always on until somebody unplugs it. You can connect to it over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, record audio, video, all kinds of things, right? So just think about that in the context of your own environment, whether it's an executive board meeting, whether it's a roadmap meeting, whether it's other sensitive discussions that may be going on. Additionally, when you take a look at the configuration of these devices, again, out of the box, they have a default configuration. Many of them have a built-in virtual access point. And that virtual access point, if it remains unconfigured, can allow anybody to connect to it, including surveillance cameras that may have been deployed in your own environment. In addition, as we all know, there's all this cloud functionality too, right, with surveillance cameras. So your videos are stored online, hopefully securely, and then you can access them via a mobile app or a browser so that you always have this information on file if there had been any kind of intrusion. They comprise a lot of different insecure protocols from what we've analyzed. So both looking at it from a layer 2 and a layer 3 perspective, using things like Wireshark and other types of tools, I've noticed that Stupid Service Discovery Protocol, also known as Simple Service Discovery Protocol, leverages UPnP. And so when you put a lot of these IoT devices in general, including surveillance cameras, there are a variety of services that communicate automatically. And if you planted one on the network, it would automatically do an mSearch and a Notify, and you can, in a way, discover other IoT devices on the network that you could see, monitor, and even weaponize, which we'll show on the next slide. In addition, on the last slide, there's also protocols such as RTSP. This is a long-time protocol for surveillance cameras. By default, it's wide open, no encryption. If you're on the network and you have the ability to monitor this, right, you can intercept the streams or just go to the HTTP webpage and actually view the videos or download a copy of your own. So if you have a consultant that plugs into your network and they came across one of these, they could find the HTTP page and then just download all the surveillance videos for your company. And then cloud providers, which would be a really interesting one I'll talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. So looking at this in more detail then, as I mentioned, legacy surveillance cameras typically use clear text communications. This may be back to the DVR or whatever you're using for storing the videos. And in addition, for a long time, they'll have a little built-in Apache server. You can connect to the HTTP page. It's totally unauthenticated, no password required, and you can go in and access these surveillance videos. We also tested to see if we could weaponize some of the packets. And so I had inserted some commands that's similar to if you're doing a Mirai virus, whereby you could go ahead and exfiltrate data by actually doing CNC commands. And we found that it would accept those commands. You could then remotely connect or have that data sent outbound only to another server. And that was something we demonstrated at DEF CON 2 years ago. Next slide. This was really interesting, and this should hit home for everybody. So in this case, it was a spy camera, but I later found this for a commercial camera. I can't mention my name because I submitted the vulnerability to BugCrowd and they accepted it, but they wouldn't let me release the vulnerability. So we'll talk about a spy camera. So with the spy camera, I was doing testing around this, and like many surveillance cameras, your videos can get stored to the cloud, and as I mentioned, it allows you a mechanism by which you can store them and remotely access them. Upon setting this up, and fortunately I have a separate network at home and things like that for doing my lab testing, I found that this surveillance camera was sending stuff, I didn't know yet what that was at the time, to Alibaba, both in China and Canada. As I looked at it more, I saw my videos being sent there, yet I didn't have a remote way to access them, because this was a spy camera. It didn't really fundamentally provide a cloud service. But somebody was getting copies of my videos. Right? Fortunately, I have a lab set up and I just had it pointed at a blank wall for the testing, right? But just think about that for a moment, right? You don't even know where these videos are going. Here's where it gets really interesting. I then see my username and password sent clear text out of my network out to the internet to this random cloud service at Alibaba in China.
Nice.
Right. And I was really surprised. Fortunately, I use a dummy username and password for all my test devices, and it's a good thing I did, because in this case it paid off, right? But I also found these same vulnerabilities with a very well-known household name surveillance camera system as well. So we had released the results of this at DEF CON, and coincidentally 2 weeks later, on the next slide, the US put a ban on the same cameras that we had revealed during DEF CON. I can't say the two were connected, but it was one heck of a coincidence, because it was the exact same video cameras that we had exposed at DEF CON. Next slide. A lot of IoT is enabled through hubs, right? Samsung, Google, Amazon, and others enable this IoT connectivity typically through a hub. And that hub will typically daisy chain off your home network, either via Ethernet or typically Wi-Fi. But on the other side of it, it serves out Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Wi-Fi, and all kinds of stuff. But what about the hardware itself? This was a surveillance camera system that comes with a hub, very well-known name, I can't mention him by name. And I said, I'd already been testing wireless thumb drives, right? We talked about that earlier. I was like, what if somebody went to a party at somebody else's house and said, hey, I'd like to get a copy of all of their videos. I wonder if I plug a USB into this port, if I can get a copy of the same videos that are sent to the cloud. So I tested it on my own hub, and sure enough, doing nothing more than I got a copy of all the videos. Didn't ask me to authenticate, there was no encryption, nothing. As soon as I plugged in, I had a copy of all the videos. And because this thumb drive is wirelessly enabled, somebody in the neighboring house could actually have remote access to all my surveillance feeds, right? Just think about that for a second, right? That scared the heck out of me, you know? So I disclosed that vulnerability to them as well. Next slide. So we've got more to cover, but to pause for a second, in terms of what I've covered so far, you know, if you find this stuff interesting, on our website at 802Secure, we have copies of these presentations that I mentioned. Some of it was covered during the presentation I'd done at RSA, and the other ones at DEF CON. And we have all those available. They're also all out on YouTube as well, if you'd like to check them out. Okay, next slide. So far, so good? Is this interesting stuff? Go ahead.
Could you repeat that website again?
Oh yeah, it's 802 Secure, yep, 802secure.com. And I'll have the URL on the last page for you as well. So yeah, thank you. Cellular threats. One of the other things we do with our product, we basically have a wireless sensor and it's tied to the cloud. And for companies in which we're doing, IoT monitoring and RF analysis and assessment is we also look beyond Wi-Fi. We look at things such as cellular. So we do a lot of threat research around cellular. Many of us have probably heard about Stingray as well as, rogue cell towers popping up around the DC area. It's also been a problem actually within Las Vegas, and some of the casinos we work with have a particular concern about it because they've been targeted by it. And so what we find is that this is becoming easier and easier to weaponize. Software-defined radios are readily available. You can buy them for 20 bucks now on Amazon. And furthermore, with simply an SDR and a laptop and probably a decent antenna, you can really pull off this type of rogue cell tower attack. And there's a good example on the next slide. At DEF CON a few years ago, somebody showed how they actually weaponized a Verizon home like femtocell, where they hacked it and weaponized it and used it so as they saw people connect to it, which is really an extension of the cellular network, they could use it for man-in-the-middle attacks. They could use it to prevent them from dialing 911. And they can use it for location tracking and all types of interesting things, similar to a Wi-Fi pineapple if you're going to do a man-in-the-middle attack. Very, very similar. Next slide. This one's really, really interesting. So drones. Many of us have purchased a drone on Amazon today, right? Through some other online website. And a lot of these drones, you can get for under $100. You can get a DJI drone, other kinds of things. And when you first set it up, you typically can download a mobile app. You pair the mobile device to the drone to allow you to potentially fly it, record audio, record video, take pictures, things like that. Some of the more powerful drones can even be weaponized to drop pathogens. We work with law enforcement. They've seen cell phones dropped over prison walls and things like that. So there's so many different things now, and it presents like a whole new risk people are trying to figure out how to adapt to. We find even working with the casinos that the paparazzi and other folks are flying drones around VIP areas and other things around the premises. So, next slide. Many times, some of these drones actually have Wi-Fi built into it. So they have a virtual access point built into the drone. So I'll tell you a story and then we'll talk about this slide. So we have a critical infrastructure customer that we work with, power distribution, and they have our sensors deployed at their facility. And one day we actually detected a drone and they got an alert. The drone was flying over on the back portion of the facility where the power distribution takes place. But because everything we look at, we look at all wireless, including machine to machine or MTM communications, we saw some other things in the environment. They're fairly remote. And especially around the perimeter of the facility, there really shouldn't be a whole lot going on. There's two adjacent roads and they're not really traveled a whole lot. But we saw a mobile device as well along the edge of the fence. And interestingly enough, we saw the mobile device paired to the drone. So we saw two individual devices and we saw the pairing as well. Because as I mentioned, even if you have a hobbyist type drone, you can use a mobile device for flying it around and recording video and audio and things like that. Here's where it gets really interesting though. The mobile device we located was outside the fence, which makes sense. Someone went up to the edge of the fence, launched the drone, flew it over to another portion of the property. But there was a third device. We found a brand new Ford F-150 with smart technology, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And based on our DVR logs, our historical audit logs, moments before we saw the drone, we saw the mobile device paired to the truck over Bluetooth. Because it was probably listening to Pandora or Spotify or something like that. So now we had three important pieces of information, and we could show a relationship between all of these devices. So whereas normally you might try to knock the drone out of the air or catch it with a net, which actually is a lot more difficult than it sounds, right? And if you try to knock a drone out of the air, right, it might hit somebody, it might damage the facility, right? Now you got some really powerful forensics data. I'm doing the exact same thing here with MRaggo. So with free tools, you can do the same kind of analysis. It may not necessarily be automated, but what we're talking about here is that, when we identify that information, especially the truck, the physical security team now was able to go back to the surveillance cameras. They got a visual on the Ford F-150, got the guy's license plate, and caught the adversary. And so for them, they found that to be super helpful, right? So looking at this then, if I was going to do my own analysis, how would I do that? Well, if I'm running Kali, or maybe old school Backtrack, or things like that, I could run Kismet, MRaggo, all kinds of tools. But I would see the access point, which is right here. The first 3 octets of this MAC address, something called the OUI, right, which is mapped back to the manufacturer. Typically, this might map to some random Chinese manufacturer, but in this case, it maps back to a DJI drone, right? And furthermore, a default SSID. Many times on the drone, you can't change the SSID like you can with an access point. It's burned in. And coincidentally, it also appends the last 3 octets, uniquely identifying the drone. So if I saw this drone today, and then tomorrow I saw the same SSID, even if they changed the MAC address, I would know it's the same drone, and I would know somebody's casing my facility, right? Furthermore, I see there's a client connected to the drone. This is the mobile device, right? So now I've got a pairing and a relationship that if I actually caught somebody that I thought was the adversary, and they had that mobile device, I now have forensic evidence that ties them to the drone and the activity, right? And this is nothing more than just sniffing the network, right? The wireless or the RF in the surrounding environment. Next slide. So if you have concerns around this, or you're responsible for a facility where you may want to monitor this type of activity, right? Beyond the drone itself, there's actually a lot of other forensic data potentially hanging out there that can be really powerful to your incident response, your triage, and your forensic investigation. Okay. So far, so good. Is that cool? Okay. All right. I've been talking about this vulnerability for years, and it's still alive and well. So back when Windows 7 came out, Microsoft came out with something called virtual Wi-Fi. So here's the idea. Let's say that I got on a flight and they had GoGo in-flight. And I'm going on vacation, so I got my wife and my daughter sitting next to me. And I pay for GoGo in-flight. But rather than pay for my daughter to have internet access and my wife to have internet access and for me to have internet access, I pay for one GoGo in-flight and I share it out to my wife and my daughter over this virtual Wi-Fi. Right? Now we all have hotspots, right? So there's nothing fancy there. But what is fancy about it is I'm using the same Wi-Fi card for my Wi-Fi connectivity as I'm using for sharing it out like an access point. So I have a Wi-Fi card in my laptop behaving both like an access point and a client. And this is a native functionality of Windows, all the way up through Windows 10. Now think about that for a second. You can set this up via the command line. It's not exposed within Windows, but it's just a couple simple commands, and it's been out there for many, many years. If you go to the next slide. So let's say I came into work, and I brought my laptop in and I connected over to the network with an Ethernet jack. I don't know how many people still do that, but let's say you connected over Ethernet to the network, right? I could then share out my access of the corporate network over Wi-Fi to anybody passing by. And I can set up that Wi-Fi as open, no password, no encryption, and they can ride that connection into the network, right? Here's where it gets really interesting. If you go to the next slide, now let's say I show up at work and I connect to the corporate Wi-Fi over my Wi-Fi card. Maybe I'm using 802.1x, maybe I'm using AES encryption, WPA pre-shared key, whatever it is, right? I'm connected to the ultra secure, super secure corporate network, LDAP authentication, Azure Active Directory, whatever it may be, right? But I leverage that same Wi-Fi card to share out access to anybody else passing by. So these people can connect to my open Wi-Fi network and connect to that network because this also serves out NAT, gives them an IP address, And now they have unauthenticated, unencrypted access to my corporate network. This is on every version of Windows since Windows 7. How would I detect this? When you think about Wi-Fi connectivity fundamentally, there are things called probe requests and probe responses. So you'll see the broadcast, right? You'll see the Wi-Fi network, the SSID, okay? And you'll send a probe request, or one is sent from your laptop, and the access point will respond with a probe response, and then you're allowed access to the network, right? And well, the same thing happens here. If I have an intruder laptop and then my workstation that I'm sharing out, you can see I've got this connectivity. But if you look at it within Wireshark on the next slide, you'll also see I've got a laptop that's behaving both like a client and an access point, which is a big no-no. That's how you could find this activity, right? Why do I have a laptop in my company that's providing wireless access to anybody passing by? That's a big security risk, right? So, and this is on every Windows laptop since Windows 7, any version. Next slide. Other things to look for, and this gets back to my PCI days. I used to be a PCI QSA, and then I was later a participant in the PCI Council. I had to give some people some guidance regarding this of what I've seen in the field, right? We would go out and do pen testing gigs, and I would find they'd say, oh, you know what, we had a Wi-Fi assessment done like a year ago, and I'm like, do you want us to do a delta on the new findings, right? We would find they did a Wi-Fi assessment only looking at the 2.4 gigahertz. Not even looking at 802.1a and 5 gigahertz spectrum or anything. So really only assessed half of the picture for the whole organization, which was mind-blowing, right? If you're looking to identify, attackers, it's very easy to change the MAC address on your device, right? To kind of hide who you really are if you're doing something nefarious. But hackers get lazy too, and when they do, we find, MAC addresses like this, or ones that don't really map to an OUI, or other types of interesting activity. Furthermore, if somebody's doing an evil twin, when you look at your Wi-Fi packet capture, you'll also see the RSSI values, which are the signal strength values. If I see two identical access points, but with different antenna strengths, one of them's probably real, and one of them's probably fake. So just some ideas on how you can look at that for yourselves. I also used to do forensic investigations, and in terms of like Bluetooth skimming, that's still alive and well today. I had been called out to do analysis for a fast food chain, and they had a credit card breach. They knew it stemmed from this particular store, but they didn't know why or how it had occurred. And while everybody's running around in the store, I show up with my little, backtrack laptop at the time, some weird dongles, and everybody's like, who's this guy, right? Because there's all this law enforcement here, there. So if you go to the next slide. Before I get into that, though, when you think about Bluetooth or even BLE today, right, low energy, there's different classes of radios, okay? Ones that we traditionally think of in terms of a headset, might be a class 3, and that could transmit maybe a meter, maybe longer. But there are other classes of long-range Bluetooth radios, like class 2 and class 1. If you go to the next slide. So I show up again with my gear, and everybody's wondering, like, who the heck is this guy, right? So I'm just minding my own business, and I'm running backtrack, and I have this dongle I had gotten on eBay at the time for $10 for doing Bluetooth analysis, and built into Kali and Backtrack and other tools, there are a variety of Bluetooth analysis tools, such as HCI tool. And this allows you to do analysis of Bluetooth and find all the Bluetooth devices in your environment. If you go to the next slide. In addition to that, though, there's something else called STP tool that lets you analyze the services. So I go into the fast food chain, I find like a bunch of Bluetooth devices, which didn't surprise me, right? Everybody's got mobile devices, headsets, all kinds of things. But I find a class 2 device, and that stood out to me like, like an anomaly, right? Because most of the devices are class 1, and I find this class 2 device. So I start investigating it for more, and I actually use SDP tool to actually interrogate the device and expose the services on it. And upon doing so, I started to see some really weird and strange stuff, including services that we knew at the time were kind of tied to Bluetooth skimming. But even nonetheless, this Class 2 device was very weird. At that point, I broke out my mobile device. And there are lots of free apps you can download that do layer 1 analysis, that do spectrum analysis, right? And you can do antenna strength and see that, find where, a particular device is, like right here, right? So as I'm, going around the store, I suspect like there's probably some Bluetooth skimming going on here, but I need to find the right register. So I go right down the front line, right? And boom, one of the cash registers, I get like almost 100% signal, right? And it's at that point, the manager says, hold on a second. 2 months ago, somebody came in and repaired that particular terminal. The technician took the terminal with them, the payment terminal, and brought it back the next day. So then law enforcement came over, we flipped it over, we took the bottom plate off, and sure enough, we saw a Bluetooth radio soldered into the motherboard on the bottom. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of interesting research being done out there. We also do a lot of our own organic research. Some of the risks that we find systemically across a lot of organizations, for example, every organization we work with, we find at least one rogue IoT device on the network. And in 90% of the organizations, we find some type of shadow IoT device that's not touching the network, but presents a risk, like a wireless storage device, or a misconfigured smart TV, or a wireless printer that's wide open, or many of the other things that we've talked about. Also, and this is based on the analysis I did in 2017, this has actually grown quite a bit, and we released research in 2018 and then at RSA here this year, that beyond that, 50% of the companies at the time, throughout the year, we found at least one spy camera that showed up and later disappeared from their environment. 50% of the companies had at least one spy camera throughout the entire year. So these are very common, and this is about a year and a half ago now, right? It's even more frequent now. You've seen like hospitality, airports, everything else where spy cameras are being found. So how do you look at the problem and how do you solve this, right? There's so much stuff, right? Many of these we've actually talked about during this presentation, but it's good to think about for a moment and take note of like, well, what are all the devices? If I was to ask 10 different people, tell me like, 5 different IoT devices you know about, there'd be just a ton of these different devices and other things they would bring up. But the point being is everybody would have a different list of devices, right? IoT is everywhere in all shapes and forms. Next slide. This is the only slide about us before I give you the icing on the cake. In terms of what we do, we have a product called AirShield, and we have a wireless sensor, and it's tied to the cloud. And what we do is wireless assessment for IoT, both on the network, IoT roads, as well as off the network or the physical side. One of the interesting things around the research we do is we do wireless deep packet inspection, or WDPI. The reason we do that is when you think about all the IoT devices in the environment, how many here have some kind of network product that gives them long lists of MAC addresses and you have to figure out what those things are? I know everybody's hand should be raised right now, so everybody's just being super shy. I see it at every customer site, right? And it'll show the mappings, it'll extract the OUI, and it'll be like, yeah, some random Chinese manufacturer in China, and you're like, what is this thing, right? The reason we do wireless deep packet inspection, and we've trained and modeled this around the machine learning that we use and the classifiers we've trained, is so you can get a much clearer picture of what the device is in your environment. Because if you're in a very transient environment like a hospital or an airport or a casino or somewhere else where lots of people are coming and going, you don't want to see every wireless device in the environment. It's a waste of your time, right? But if you can pull those needles out of the haystack and say, well, amongst the 10,000 devices we saw, there's one spy camera over on that side of the building, a new smart TV showed up in that room, and there's a brand new refrigerator over on the other side of the building. I know these are things that people are not moving around, that as they're traveling through the building, right? These are devices that are installed or planted in certain locations, right? And so really getting to the root of finding these risks is really pulling the needles out of the haystack to help you find and identify what the true risks are in your environment. Sound cool? Right. All right, so last slide. So you always got to have that NIST triad slide, right? And this is it for this context, right? Beyond your own network, there's a variety and a plethora of shadow IoT risks, as well as nearby threats too, right? That can range from vehicles, drones, spy cameras, rogue cell towers. We covered a lot of different aspects and examples of that. Shadow IoT, so many different devices, right? And just because the device doesn't connect to your network doesn't mean it doesn't present a risk, right? Somebody has a wireless thumb drive, right? They back up data on that, right? That doesn't touch your network at all, right? So definitely a risk there as well. Next slide. If you're interested in this infographic, which really captures the essence of this presentation, you can download this from the homepage of our website too. And it talks about some other risks I didn't even have time to get into. We've done research around smartwatches and things like that. That was research that I presented at HackCon in Norway, at DEF CON and other places. And it talks about, you know, the security and comparing that of the different smartwatches, whether it's Samsung or Apple or many of the other devices. So there's actually a research report around that too, that we did around how they communicate, how the data at rest is stored and things like that. And then some of the other reports that I mentioned too. And I think it's the last slide. So hopefully you got some good gold nuggets out of that, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike, for all of that. A lot of information that I'm sure that everybody took away. It's going to take back to work and tell all your friends. All right, so for those of you who are new, we saw a show of hands earlier. We would love for you guys to join ISSA. We do have memberships available if you are interested and would like to join what we do, which is get together like this, share knowledge, information among our peers. Yes, it's different companies around Columbus, but we all have the same goal ultimately, so we would love for you guys to join. In addition, we have some open volunteer positions, Director of Events and Marketing, Director of Member Experience. We have a nominating committee we need 2 members for, and speakers for chapter events. We still have 2 openings for those, much like Mike. So, in addition, we also have training opportunities. If you join ISSA, you can get CPEs from attending our events, including the trade crafts that we have each month, along with the general meeting. So if you attend our trade crafts, you can also get CPEs for those. Sometimes they're anywhere from 1 hour to 3 hours, just depends on what the event is. In the news, we did provide you guys with a few topics. It's listed here, so if you receive the handout, there are some links there. Some of the topics talk about malware leaks for source code, some large fines by the FTC to Facebook. Although they've been fined before for leaks of PII, they are getting hefty fines lately. Pretty large, actually. It seems like larger than their quarterly earnings. So it also talks about how the rules and regulations are likely to get stricter as we get into 2020. So some of those are very interesting. There's some IoT malware on cameras on one of those links as well. And some cyber extortion information, much like it used to be mail extortion. The cyber extortion is increasing because of things like Bitcoin, where it's anonymous and people can use it and nobody will know who it is. Also in our community, be sure to check out the other security events and organizations around the community that we have. And again, make sure that you take care of our wait staff, order food. We still have the room for a little while longer. Talk to folks, meet folks while you're here, and order drinks. All right. Peter, you have anything?
So I'm current serving president of our local community chapter. Again, I just want to invite all of you again to consider maybe joining. If you're not able to join, do get with us after the show, either myself or Christine. We'd love to get your email address, at least put on our public distribution. We do put on these events quarterly, and again, we invite you to participate in that. Also, we're going to have the bar area over here to the front, so let's definitely take advantage of that. Also, if you're, again, not planning on joining, but you did really enjoy the event that we were able to put on, we do have a donation jar. Again, your donations help significantly. This year, we've been able to engage in training. I don't know if any of you are familiar with CISSP. Generally for, I want to say almost every InfoSec position out there, once you start getting to the mid-level, that's typically considered a, just one of those check boxes that you have to hit in order to really break in at mid-level and kind of above. And so for our community, because of some of the donations we've gotten, we've been able to put on free training for our membership. We're looking at training 15 people in that. Again, this is a mid-level certification. I have 8 volunteer instructors, all who are specialized in each of the 8 domains. Some have more than 20 years experience working in that particular domain. And again, those are people in our community. And so your donations support things like that. Again, thank you everyone for coming out. Look forward to socializing with all of you. Thank you.